The story of Sean Patrick Goble, also known as the Interstate Killer, born November 1st, 1966, he is an American serial killer. A former truck driver, Goble kidnapped and murdered at least 4 women in the southern United States between 1994 and 1995. Since his arrest, authorities in 10 other states have investigated him for numerous unsolved killings of women. While he was cleared in some of those cases, as of today, his true victim count remains unclear. Goble was born on November 1st, 1966, in Ashburn, North Carolina, the son of Kenneth and Irma Goble. His family moved to Illinois. The first major event to happen in his life occurred at age 6, when his father awed a 10-year-old girl during a home invasion in Rockford. Young Sean was sitting in his dad's vehicle outside of the crime scene during the attack. Kenneth was charged with the crime and was sentenced to serve 4 to 20 years in prison. He was released after just 4 years. As for Sean, he, his mother and sister continued to live in Rockford, where he attended Auburn High School. In 1984, he dropped out during his senior year. 2 years later, his father, who was now living in New Mexico, was charged with awing a 6-year-old there, for which he was sent back to prison, being released sometime in 1994. Sean Goble joined the army and later got married, fathering a son. His marriage later fell apart, and Sean moved to North Carolina in 1988, where he began working as a truck driver in 1991. At 225 pounds and 6 foot 3 inches, Goble described himself as a ladies' man. Lisa Susan O'Rourke, 29, was a native of St. Louis, Missouri. In January 1994, Goble picked up O'Rourke along Interstate 10 in either Louisiana or Mississippi. He and O'Rourke had sex before he strangled her to death, dumping her body under a bridge along Interstate 65 in Alabama. Her body was found on January 23rd, and her death initially ruled as hypothermia, but it was eventually ruled as murder. Her identity was not revealed until April of that year by fingerprinting. Brenda K. Hagee, 45, was Globe's second known victim. A native of Bloomington, Indiana, Hagee had a history of criminal charges in her native state for trespassing into truck stops, areas that are hotspots for prostitution. Hagee frequently moved across the east side of the country as a vagrant. She stayed at a homeless shelter in Gainesville, Florida on January 22, 1995. The next day she voyaged to Tennessee, where at a service station she was abducted by Goble, who proceeded to awe and strangle her to death, breaking her neck in the process. He later drove his truck all the way to Bristol, Virginia, where he left her body along an access road to Interstate 81. He ran over her legs while in the process of driving away. The body was found later that day. An investigation was set up by police, who received numerous tips, the most promising being from a trucker who said he saw a semi-parked along the same access road hours before Hagee's body was found. Sherry Two Manser, 34, had a history of arrests for prostitution from 1982 to 1994. She was last seen alive by friends and family on January 31st, 1995, while visiting her sister in Bowie, Maryland. She later left the home with her 2-year-old niece, who was located the following morning in Washington, D.C. In Fredericksburg, Virginia, Goble picked up Miss Manser while driving his truck. According to Goble, the two had sex before he decided to strangle her to death. He later dumped her body along Interstate 40, where it was found on February 19. When the body was found, her identity could not be conclusively proven, so for the next few months she was only known as Jane Doe. Alice Rebecca Haynes, 36, was a native of Columbus, Ohio. She had been convicted of prostitution in the past. Her last location before her death was in Salina, Kansas, when she called from a truck stop along Interstate 70. From there, she hitchhiked to Tennessee, where Goble kidnapped her from a gas station and smothered her to death. He dumped her body along Interstate 81 in Virginia. During the investigation, a plastic bag left behind at Hagee's murder contained the fingerprint of her killer. When submitted into a database, investigators got a hit when it matched a print taken from Goble in September 1994, after an arrest for multiple misdemeanors. From there, he was arrested in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, outside the Rocky Road Express, the trucking company he was then working for. A search warrant was issued on his truck. In it, police found a pocketbook that belonged to Haynes. They also seized travel bags, pornographic magazines, and women's panties. During an interrogation, Goble confessed to both murders and admitted that he had killed a woman in North Carolina. Authorities figured out it was the Jane Doe, and he was charged charged in her death. When the woman was identified as Mansur, he was charged in her murder. Along with Tennessee and North Carolina, Goble was also investigated in killings in numerous other states. A day after his arrest, he was investigated for the 1992 murder of 21-year-old Tammy Zwicky of Evesham, New Jersey. For a brief period of time, Goble was investigated as a suspect for the serial killer known as Dr. No. He was later cleared of suspicion in these cases because in some of the earlier killings, Goble was still in high school and later in the army. Some murders that Goble was suspected of include multiple Jane Does found along highways between 1987 and 1995, the murder of Marsha Matthews in 1985, the murder of Shirley Dean Taylor in 1986, the murder of April Barnett in 1986, the murder of Anna Patterson in 1987, the murder of Catherine Hill, also known as Wendy Turner, in 1990, the murder of Cheryl Mason in 1991, the murder of Nona Cobb in 1992, and the murder of Margaret Goines in 1995. Goble was ruled out in Cobb's murder due to DNA testing, and in 2022 a different man was arrested for her death. Goble briefly stated that the murder of Hager was unintentional, but that was disproved by investigators. Goble pleaded guilty to killing Hager and Haynes in Tennessee, for which he was imposed 2 life sentences. He was later extradited to North Carolina and pled guilty to the murder of Mansur, receiving an additional 14 years to his 2 life sentences. Due to these convictions, Goble would be required to serve at least 103 years to be considered for parole. Goble was later indicted with O'Rourke's murder and transferred to Baldwin County Correctional Center to await trial for the murder. In April 1997, however, Alabama authorities decided to not prosecute him any further because of his current life sentences. Goble later took back his confessions, but nevertheless stayed behind bars. Goble is currently serving his sentence at Northeast Correctional Complex in Doe Valley, Tennessee.